Buddy Baker was a movie stuntman who came into contact with a downed alien spacecraft. The encounter left Buddy with the ability to mimic any nearby animal via a morphogenic field. Later, Buddy would christen himself Animal Man.
Animal Man remained relatively obscure, making only sporadic appearances throughout the 60s and 70s. That is until 1988, when writer Grant Morrison launched an Animal Man solo series that took the character in a bold new direction.
Morrison would look at the impact being a superhero had on Buddy's life and family, the latter of whom was not too happy that Buddy gave up full-time income as a stuntman to become a full-time superhero. Other stories included the Bakers becoming vegetarians after Buddy realized that he really shouldn't be eating the animals' abilities he was copying, and Buddy adding a jacket to his ensemble after realizing that his costume didn't have pockets and he needed a place to keep his wallet and keys.
The series proved to be an instant success with both fans and critics. Eventually, it would be one of the founding books of DC's mature readers line, Vertigo. Later on, Buddy would become an animal avatar for the elemental force known as the Red.
What is an elemental force, you ask? Well, we're going to have to wait till a later storyline to cover those in detail. Just now, think of them as godlike forces that dwell in mystical realms outside of the mainstream DC universe.
Animal Man would eventually make his way back to the mainstream DC universe in the build-up to the Infinite Crisis event. Buddy would be drafted to travel to outer space and fight in the Rann-Thanagar War. Buddy's long journey back to Earth would play a major part in the follow-up to Infinite Crisis, the weekly series 52.
In 2009, longtime comic veteran Jerry Conway was tasked with writing a story detailing the final days of Buddy Baker's life as a superhero. And that's the story we're looking at today. Here is The Last Days of Animal Man.
It is the year 2024. The city of San Diego is about to christen the Southern Coast Sea Levee that they have been building for the past decade.
Okay, I should point out here that there was a storyline in DC Comics, primarily Aquaman, in which half the city of San Diego broke off of the coast and sank into the ocean. However, the denizens of San Diego were actually able to live underwater, and they would rechristen that section of the city Sub-Diego.
The celebration is cut short when a large chunk of the levee breaks away. The culprit reveals himself to be Blood Rage, and he intends to hold San Diego for ransom. It's then that Animal Man swoops in to take on the villain. Blood Rage counters by using his ability to channel energy from the blood of nearby bystanders. He then battering rams Buddy into the levee. Buddy then begins using the morphogenic field to tap into a gorilla nearby. Except he can't. The power just suddenly vanishes. Blood Rage tosses Buddy over the levee wall. Buddy tries even harder to tap into the morphogenic field as he splashes into the Pacific Ocean. Finally, he's able to sense a nearby shark. Buddy leaps over the levee and tackles Blood Rage. The police then intervene as Animal Man begins brutally pounding the villain into the pavement. Sometime later, Buddy's wife Ellen confronts him. She knows he's having problems tapping into his powers. Apparently this happened once before, while Buddy was flying. Buddy assures Ellen that there's nothing to worry about. The next day, Buddy is at work coordinating a stunt on a movie set when he hears of Blood Rage attempting to escape from jail. He's absorbed the energies of his defense attorney and the nearby guards. Buddy suits up and takes off. He charges in and rams Blood Rage with the blood force of an elephant, only to once again lose the connection. Blood Rage then decks Buddy so hard he goes straight up into the air. As he falls, Buddy desperately tries to reconnect with the morphogenic field. Finally, salvation comes, in the form of Green Lantern.
Yeah, so now Earth's Green Lantern is a whale. Now, the text says that this is a blue whale as the Green Lantern, but to be honest, to me, that looks more like a humpback whale than a blue whale.
Green Lantern catches Buddy and then incapacitates Blood Rage by cutting off the villain's oxygen. Afterwards, Buddy asks for Green Lantern to take him home, a little angrily. This has all been witnessed by a woman. The woman slowly begins confronting the ghost of her late mother. She never liked her mother, but she's hated her father even more. Evan McCulloch, the Mirror Master.
Mirror Master is a longtime Flash villain who utilizes a special gun to access a mirror dimension via any reflective surface that allows him to travel anywhere in the world at will. And yes, I am aware that Emma McCulloch is actually the second Mirror Master, the original being named Sam Scudder, but Sam Scudder doesn't really appear in this story, so we're not going to talk about him any further.
This mysterious woman's mother was seduced by McCulloch until she discovered his secret life. Her mother turned McCulloch in and then entered witness protection, but she was already pregnant. The two grew up with a strained relationship. The mother subconsciously rejected her daughter. Eventually, her mother died, and the woman began studying the science behind the Mirror Master's technology. Eventually, she managed to open a portal to the Mirror Master's dimension. She entered it and found MacLeod, who had long since retreated into the dimension, and now he was just a husk of a man. So she killed him. Now she seeks to exceed her father's reputation, not as Mirror Master or Mirror Mistress, but as Prismatic. Meanwhile, Buddy sits on the edge of a cliff while Green Lantern scans him. The Lantern discovers that the morphogenic portion of Buddy's DNA is unraveling. In other words, he's losing his powers, and it's accelerating. Buddy lashes out and asks to be left alone, so Lantern flies off. It's then that Prismatic makes her move. She knows Buddy is vulnerable, which means he's easy to take out. She knocks Buddy up into the air. However, Buddy manages to tap into a nearby flock of birds. Realizing the power lasts longer as long as the animals are closer to him, Buddy manages to lead Prismatic to the San Diego Zoo, in particular the gorilla pit. Buddy taps into the gorilla and begins pounding Prismatic into the ground. He's only interrupted by the intervention of the League of Titans.
Yes, this is obviously a combination of members of the Justice League and the Teen Titans. Joining Superman, we have Power Girl, who served alongside Animal Man in Justice League Europe, Nightwing, the former Dick Grayson, Red Tornado, who was once an air elemental, and Nightwing's on-again, off-again girlfriend, Starfire, who has another connection to the Baker family, but we'll touch on that a little bit later.
Buddy goes back with the League to their headquarters, where they once again confirm that he's losing his powers. Red Tornado hypothesizes that Buddy has roughly a week left. As the League disappears, Starfire stays behind with Buddy. She fills Buddy in on Prismatic's condition. She's under medical observation at a maximum security prison. Starfire attributes the aggression he took out on Prismatic to hearing the news about his powers, but Buddy points out he's known about his powers long before Lantern told him. He was just in denial about it.
Buddy and Starfire's friendship goes back to the Infinite Crisis storyline, where the two took part in the war between the planets Rann and Thanagar. Afterwards, the two, along with another spacefaring hero named Adam Strange, spent a year trying to get back to Earth. This was covered in the 52 comic. And after that comic, Starfire's powers were actually drained to the ability she couldn't really use them, so she actually lived with the Baker family for a while.
As Buddy prepares to leave, he's struck with a moment of inspiration. He rushes back to the League and points out that his two children, Cliff and Maxine, were born after he acquired his powers, so maybe their DNA could be used to repair his. Red Tornado points out that the likelihood of it working is fairly remote, but Buddy remains undeterred, so the League agrees to help Buddy out as he teleports back to San Diego. Upon arrival, Buddy tells Ellen the good news as he prepares to visit Maxine and Cliff, except she's not too happy about it. Buddy was missing all night, leaving Ellen extremely worried. Buddy has spent much of the last 20 years putting superhero before being a family man, and now she's tired of it. She storms off, leaving a shell-shocked Buddy behind. Meanwhile, at the prison where Prismatic is being observed, she comes to. At first, no one is afraid as there's no reflective surfaces in the room, except for the security camera, and Prismatic uses that to escape. She then sets about freeing Blood Rage after he accepts her offer to take out Animal Man and the League of Titans. Back with Buddy, he visits his daughter Maxine as she finishes practice for a college basketball team. She agrees to give a DNA sample, and Buddy asks if she, Maxine, ever resented him. Maxine said early on Buddy's heroing did make her upset, but she eventually grew to accept it. Buddy then visits to go his son Cliff, who works as an attorney for several environmental activist groups. Unfortunately, Cliff is such a workaholic that he hasn't been on a date in months. Cliff was inspired by Buddy and his dedication to protecting others, to a fault. Back at League headquarters, Tornado begins running the tests on Cliff and Maxine's DNA as Buddy laments that he's wasted his relationship with his kids. The test finishes, and it's bad news. The DNA will not re-establish Buddy's connection to the morphogenic field. The good news is, his condition is not fatal. Buddy is only losing his powers, not dying. The news leaves Buddy more upset than ever, and Starfire begins consoling him as Tornado leaves. Unfortunately, this leads to a moment of weakness for Buddy, and the two begin kissing. Realizing what he just did, Buddy breaks the kiss. Both he and Starfire apologize for what happened, only to suddenly be jumped by Blood Rage and Prismatic. Blood Rage goes after Animal Man while Starfire takes on Prismatic. Blood Rage begins siphoning off the energy from Buddy's blood as Buddy desperately tries to tap into the morphogenic field. It works, but only briefly. Blood Rage resumes beating Buddy up. Starfire isn't very much better, as Prismatic points out that the alien princess's star bolts are just another prism that can easily be reflected back at her. Blood Rage continues pounding Animal Man, driving Buddy to consider just giving up and letting the villain kill him. This drives Buddy deep into his mind, where he visits with friends and family. Buddy realizes that fighting for his family is what kept him going as a superhero. Buddy snaps back to reality and kicks Blood Rage in the jubblies, and then makes a break towards Starfire and Prismatic. He desperately manages to tap into a nearby sea lion and tackles Prismatic. He then grabs Starfire and teleports back to San Diego. Prismatic isn't too upset, though, as she presses the League headquarters emergency beacon. Back in San Diego, the Bakers tend to Starfire's energies. They're not fatal, but they are quite extensive. Buddy explains the only real help she can get is back at League headquarters, where they can't go. He then explains that his powers appear to finally be gone. He's learned to accept it, though, as he asks for forgiveness. This is interrupted, though, by a news report featuring Blood Rage and Prismatic, and they've trapped the remaining members of the League of Titans and are ransoming them for a grand total of 7 billion euros.
That's 7.8202 billion in American dollars, by the way.
Even though his powers are gone, Buddy knows what he needs to do. He checks the morphogenic field one more time and does find the slightest connection to it. Ellen then gives her blessing as Buddy makes 2 stops before heading to New York. The first is to the movie set, where he picks up some padding and a crowbar to face the villains physically. The second is a mysterious trip to Atlanta. Buddy then hitches a helicopter ride to New York and drops in on League headquarters. He cracks Blood Rage with the crowbar, but Prismatic is able to use her powers to evade Buddy's attempts at fisticuffs. The 2 villains then teleport Buddy to Times Square, in order to use him as an example for any future attempts at thwarting them. The 2 begin beating Buddy mercilessly. Buddy then blacks out. Buddy dreams of the aliens who bestowed upon him the animal abilities. He asks why was he chosen? He was never special. The aliens point out that it's not always the destination, it's the journey one takes. When Buddy got the power, he moved on. Now the power is gone, and he must move on again. Buddy comes to at the League of Titans headquarters. Ellen is there, as are the rest of the League of Titans. They were freed when Blood Rage and Prismatic mysteriously collapsed, and all 3 fell to the ground below. It turns out that Buddy's stopover in Atlanta was to the Center for Disease Control. There, Buddy looked over a sample of a bacteria. Buddy was able to control the bacteria long enough to get to New York and infect the 2 villains with the bubonic plague. The League was able to stabilize Blood Rage and Prismatic with antibiotics, but unless bacteria completely leaves their systems, they'll be completely paralyzed. Buddy tries one last time to tap into the morphogenic field, but it isn't enough. His powers are completely gone. Prismatic leaves Buddy with a message. Go to hell. Buddy returns to San Diego and begins to settle back into a normal life. He picks up more stunt coordinating jobs and manages to have a regular dinner with his family. Eventually, he even rejoins the League of Titans by taking over full-time monitor duty. Buddy Baker has finally moved on.
And so concludes The Last Days of Animal Man. How was it? Well, the book did have some high points. There's a lot of really good characterization throughout most of this, in particular Buddy Baker and the Baker family. The artwork is passable, despite that whole whale identification thing. I like the idea of using the stages of grief as a metaphor for the loss of the superpowers, and to be honest, it actually is kind of nice to read one of these last days of a superhero story that just isn't all dreary and depressing, and actually has kind of a happy ending. That being said, there are some major drawbacks with this book. There's a lot of padding in this. This feels like a 4-issue series that for some reason got stretched out to a 6-issue series, probably to accommodate that whole stages of grief thing. And really, it just feels wrong. I mean, half of issue 2 is dedicated to Prismatic's origin, and those last 2 bits I talked about with Buddy working on the movie set again, and having dinner with his family, and rejoining the Justice League, that was half of the last issue. It just felt really unnecessary. Also, the villains are pretty uninspired. I mean, honestly, Blood Rage, that's almost as bad as Ice Spike. And really, the whole Starfire thing, the kiss with her, that was really forced. It got dropped almost as soon as it happened. It goes nowhere. It doesn't need to be in this story. And, like I said, unless you're really familiar with Animal Man, I don't know if I could really recommend this to a new reader. So, I'm going to have to give The Last Days of Animal Man a D. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.